I'm Pat Kennedy, and I'm on the board of the Friends of the Key West Library. Welcome this evening, and I want to tell you that tonight we're going to welcome Florida author Tom Corcoran, who will be in conversation with Michael Nelson, the administrator of the Key West Library. Tom, as many of you know, is the author of the very acclaimed and popular Alex Rutledge Mysteries, and he's recently published his 9th in the series, The Cayo Hueso Maze. But before we begin, I want to tell you a little bit about the Friends who we were organized 50 years ago to provide financial and volunteer support for the library. And we raise money every year, and we do it through membership, through book sales, and which we haven't been able to do this year, of course, and donations. And all the money we raise goes back to the library. Every year we're able to give about $50,000 to the library in support of staff training, children's library services, and for the Monroe County Historical Archives. So I hope you will consider joining the Friends this year. Some Zoom tips that I need to tell you about. Unlike Zoom meetings, you won't be able to be seen or heard during this presentation, but you can participate through the chat function at the bottom. You can write some notes to that. You can also pose a question through the Q&A button, and you can ask a question there, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. The last thing is that there is a place where you can buy books from Tom's Books, or you can donate or join the Friends. And with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to Michael Nelson.
And good evening to all of you joining us. We're very excited to have Tom Corcoran here tonight. He is the popular author of the Alex Rutledge Mystery Series, as well as the nonfiction work, Jimmy Buffett, The Key West Years, and a book of photography called Key West in Black and White. So I don't want to make him wait any longer. Let's bring on Tom Corcoran. Oh, there he is. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm just fine, thank you.
One of the people in the chat has a Guinness in hand, and it made me wonder how many of your readers are drinkers.
Oh, I hope none of them. No, we are not judgmental here.
So I want to start off with the new novel, The Cayo Hueso Maze, which came out just in December.
Okay.
How do you come up with the titles, and maybe give us a little bit of what the new book is about?
That title, it's a complicated puzzle. The book is, and there are several cases layered on top of each other, and it seemed like a maze to me. But at one point early in the book, I had my protagonist running through a bunch of oleander plants up on Cudjoe Key, and it seemed like he was going through an old-fashioned maze of bushes and branches and stuff like that. And I actually considered calling the book The Oleander Maze until midsummer, when oleander as a word suddenly popped up as a possible cure for the COVID, and I didn't want to get involved with that, and I didn't want to associate the book, which is an entertainment, to a tragedy, which is the pandemic, and so I punted and I went with Cayo Hueso, and which is means Isle of Bones, and I'd used Bone Island Mambo in my third novel back 20 years ago, and I thought, what the heck, I can get away with this, and so that's how that titles are funny. I'd paid attention to titles when I began to write, when I was thinking about writing a mystery series, and when I began to write, because I'd of course been a John D. MacDonald fan, and he had a color in every title of his Travis McGee books. The Lonely Silver Sea, the blue blah blah blah, the maroon, he had colors in all the, And then Sue Grafton came along and used the alphabet. A is for alibi, B is for burglar, and so they had something that tied the books together that sort of let people know it was a series. So I thought, well, okay, but the title is important in the first place because you must present one that hopefully makes a publisher in New York think you're not a flake. You gotta come up with something, and you gotta sell that title to a publisher, who's then in turn got to sell it to booksellers, who then in turn have to sell it to readers. And it occurred to me that if I had a title that people would question and say, "What the hell does that mean?" that might grab their attention more than anything else. And hopefully it says something a little bit about the books. So, but believe it or not, the Mango Opera, my first novel, had a working title, and nobody believed this, but it's true. Oh my God. Hold on. How do I pull this close? There's something I forgot. Oh, okay. All right. Oh no, my message is going to come on there too. I don't know how to do this. Silence. Yeah, go away.
I can't take your call right now.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, thanks. Call back. Yeah, it's my car warranty, and I let it slip. I'll fix that. Anyway, so I had a work title for the Mango Up. Sorry for that interruption. The working title, believe it or not, was 10,000 Shades of Gray. Yeah, because in the 70s, when I lived in Key West for 10 straight years, everything was in shades of gray. There were people who did things that were wrong, and there were people who did really bad things. And but there were gray areas where it wasn't that bad, and okay, and you're breaking the law, but okay. So I always wanted to play with the gray areas of crime, but then in the end, it's crime or not. And but I got talked out of that title because they were worried that Barnes and Noble wouldn't know how to list it as the number 10,000 or the words 10,000 and where to put it on the shelf. And I just caused problems and confusion. Why have a number start a title, 50 Shades of Gray? Yeah, what the hell. So the Mango Opera was the title of a musical that Jimmy Buffett and Thomas McGuane were going to write about Key West. And it was definitely R-rated, and or worse, and that never got done. It was a fantasy they had for a few drunken evenings, but I thought I always fell in love with that title, the Mango Opera. So I called both of them, and I got permission to use their old title, and that's how that came along. But anyway, the Gumbo Limbo came about when I was sitting in a restaurant on Duval Street called Mango's, and I asked someone at the table what the name of that tree was out near the sidewalk, and they said, that's a Gumbo Limbo. Well, my second novel had a little bit to do with New Orleans, and I thought, Gumbo, okay, all right, and everybody's in limbo in this story, all right, so I just went from there. So the titles kind of grow their own legs and grow on me and come at the last minute, or sometimes it'll hit me early in the book, and so on. And people will pick up the book, and if they like the title, they hold it in their hand. If they open the book and do what I do, which is in a bookstore, and you give a book the any page test, you open to the middle and read a paragraph and say, this author sounds interesting, I'll buy the book. And or this is a dud, I'm not going to buy the book. So anyway, that's how I work with my titles. Is that a long enough answer?
No, that's good.
Okay, I'm glad.
So what's sort of the basic plot of the new book?
The new book starts out with what seems like sort of maybe not even a problem. It's maybe just a little paranoia on the part of one of my continuing characters in the novels, a reporter for The Citizen named Marnie Dunwoody. And she's a little bit weirded out by some notes she's finding on her car from time to time. And they're kind of worded so that they aren't exactly threatening, but if you put them all together, it's somebody's messing with her. And so she comes and just wants to tell Alex about it. And she lives with Sam Wheeler, who's Alex's best friend and a charter boat captain, a light tackle fishing guide. And she'd rather tell Alex than make herself a fool by telling Sam and sounding paranoid. But Alex says, well, this could be a real problem. Let's look into this. Well, then at the same time, Alex's girlfriend, Beth Watkins, is a city detective, has a call out early in the morning to a murder scene. They don't know it's a murder scene. It could be someone who took their own life. It could be lots of things, but it is determined during the morning hours that it's a murder scene. And then things ramp up from there. That's all I can tell without throwing out spoilers. All right.
So we're going to cut this off and talk about, because we know it's going to come up, what you're working on next. And if you're willing to read a little bit from the next book.
Well, yeah, you warned me about this. I've started another one, and I kind of overwrote the beginning of it, and I did some editing just in the last week, and I'm happy with the way it starts. But it actually starts in an autobiographical way, because I wanted to describe how I got started in photography in the mid 70s, when I could actually afford a decent camera and teach myself how to use it. I actually bought books and read them, and then went out and took pictures and gave myself little assignments and so on. So the opening paragraph of the book goes like this. No title on the book, by the way, no title. At 2:15 on a Saturday afternoon, after a beer and yellowtail tacos at a beach restaurant, I walked Duval's shady side, snapping photos of any damn thing that caught my eye. Odd banners, window displays, funky vehicles, and architecture that tried but failed to capture the artistry of the ship carpenters who built at the island almost 200 years ago, built it again after fires, and rebuilt it after hurricanes. A couple of times a year, I would embark on what I used to call Kodak support missions when I began to teach myself to use cameras in the film era, and accomplish that by exploring Key West. Cooled by a breeze, immersed by the town's smells, I played with the tropical light. So that's the opening paragraph as it stands now. And of course, within about 4 paragraphs, Detective Dexter Hayes of the city police department stops his car right there in Duval Street. What are you doing here? Get in my car. I'll get you out of here. It's dangerous. He said, what's dangerous about taking pictures on Duval Street? And then we find out what's dangerous. And I can't tell you anymore. So anyway, that's how it starts. And in fact, well, I won't tell you anymore. I know how the first 3 or 4 chapters are going to roll, but let's let everybody wait, and I'll put a snappy title on it, and we'll see if I can write it in 2 years. Now, I usually take 3 years to write books, because I do this other thing called having a life, and there are some authors who are on this treadmill of knocking out a book a year, and it's just, I don't know, I can't do it, and a lot of it has to do with the publishers in New York, and a lot of it goes back to the 25, 30 years ago when Barnes & Noble said, if you'll deliver us a new so-and-so book on the 1st of February every year, we'll make sure you get the best positioning in the shelving and all that stuff. And then they were pretty well promised a spot on the New York Times list. Well, I think it got evident to my first publisher, St. Martin's Press, that I was not going to be producing at that rate. And they thought I was just a lazy old guy. And so back about 15 or 16 years ago, I decided I wanted to self-publish instead, but it had to do with my pacing, and the pandemic had everything to do with my getting this new book out in 2 years instead of 3.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to share my screen so we can look at some photographs, since we're talking about photography.
My early photographs of Key West.
Yeah. So
all right.
If you can see this.
Oh yeah. So welcome to Key West. That was I must have come from the airport, and it was down on the annex. And I thought, what in the world is that doing here? And it was kind of going to ruin. As you can see, it's falling apart. And I said, well, that probably won't even be here a year from now. So I took the picture, and people love it. But I think that's the logo of one of the airlines that dared fly into Key West in the early 70s. I don't know which one, but that's how that picture came about. I probably took that in 75 or 6.
Oh. What do we have here?
Caroline Street, when it was Caroline Street. The red doors in the foreground, and Pepe's in the back. You can see kind of left of center down there. And not much traffic, foot traffic or car traffic, but those were the quiet days of Key West in the 70s. And the architecture. Remember taxi cab 66666? That used to be on Duval Street, probably near United Street. It was a taxi stand, and those things on the wall of that building are called pay phones.
Right.
Yeah. And I just took it. I always loved the fact that in Key West in the 70s, you only dialed the last 5 digits of a phone number anyway. And it either started with a 6 or a 4. And so everybody's phone number was easy to remember. And of course, 5 6s is still 5 6s, but you have to dial the 29. Anyway, just a picture I took, and there we go. Coming soon, a world premiere. A world premiere of what Ripley's Believe It or Not for a while, and now it's a Walgreens. It's too bad because it had gone downhill, the building, and then someone restored in the early 80s. Someone restored the exterior and the interior and tried to make it back into a movie theater.
Oh wow! And
it was used that way until, I don't know, 86 or 7, but they just couldn't make a buck, and it went into what realtors call the highest and best use, which turned out to be Ripley's Believe It or Not at first. Mm-hmm. But I was always intrigued by the structure.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's the Ugly Most car. I won't name any names, Chris Robinson, but it was owned by a guy who bartended at Louis' Backyard for years and is now a light tackle guide up on Cudjoe. Oh, but I thought it was parked on Fleming, the ugliest car and the most beautiful home on the island at that point, at the corner right across from the library.
Oh,
and
yeah, right.
That's the corner of Elizabeth and Fleming. And I thought that was just a good mix of what Key West was all about there.
Good.
That's a favorite. I was trying to get the picture of the Dixie Lily truck, and I was on the corner of Fleming and Simonton. As you can see, the big discounts building is now the Marquesa. And I don't know, the settings were wrong in my camera, and I fiddled with it. And finally, my last desperate shot of that truck, but this fellow drove by on a bicycle, and the couple across the street were walking across the street, and it all just by mistake happened right. And I just love it. And there's the famous clock on the wall that always read the same time twice a day, the right time twice a day. The Q rooms were rentals above the furniture store. The turtle crawls before it tumbled into the sea and had to be restored, and I'm glad they restored it. But that was in its not in its heyday. It was a real tourist attraction during the 50s and 40s, I believe. And then, of course, they passed legislation banning the harvesting of turtles, and this is actually where they brought them in. And there was a canning plant or somewhere around there, and for turtle meat.
Did you eat turtle meat?
I never did. No, I missed that one. That's Tony's Grocery, which was somebody else's grocery. It was it's what, Grignote now. It's down on Duval. It was the French. It's still a French restaurant, just a different one now. But it's way down by Olivia, maybe even further down, Amelia, or one of those streets. I forget. Anyway. That's where that is, in Louis' Backyard. And I mean, that's so early. The stairs to go into the lobby are off to the right-hand side of the building, as you see the walkway there. And Dog Beach is sort of dog Sahara barren. And before, I think Louis did plant those palm trees on there. But the funny thing about Dog Beach that a lot of people don't know is that's the end of a street. It's platted out as the end of Vernon Street. And so it's public property, and that's why you can actually bring your dog to the beach there. That's what I was told always. But that's the weirdest. That's at the corner of Fleming and Margaret, and it became a bookstore called Flaming Maggie's. It became a Salt art gallery and so on. But it was owned by Sheila Mullins, her name was, and she was actually the mayor of Key West in about 89 and 90 for a couple of years. But she bought the building and found the sign underneath the building. The sign goes back to the Hemingway days. And Baker's Restaurant was where Hemingway would bring all his cronies when they visited him in Key West, his fishing pals. He'd take them to breakfast there. And Sheila found that sign underneath the building and hung it up. And I was driving my bike along there and I said, I've never seen that sign before. Well, of course not. It had been under the building. So I took a picture. And she said, how did you get that picture? Within 2 weeks, someone had swiped the sign. and it's probably still in somebody's yard. Give it back, But I got a picture of the original Baker's Restaurant, electric kitchen, they called it. The electric kitchen. The only thing electric was the light bulb, I think. That's the Old Island Inn. That's big in history there. In a number of ways, it's big in my history because when the Navy sent me down to an 8-week school in 1968, and I was supposed to stay in the brand new BOQ that had a brand new air conditioning system that they were very proud of. So they made it 55 degrees in the BOQ, and I couldn't stand it. So I went down to the desk and I said, if I got a place in town, would you help? They said, yes, pick any place. And they threw the Citizen at me, and I looked in the classifieds, and I got the center room top floor there with the middle balcony at the top. And later years, with the help of Lorian Hemingway and James Plath, discovered that was probably the first room that Ernest stayed in when he came to town, because he and Pauline had come from France to Havana to Key West on the ferry to pick up a Ford motor car, a Model A, that Pauline's rich uncle had bought for them, and it was supposed to be waiting for them in Key West. The downstairs at that point was the Ford dealership. The car hadn't arrived. They were very embarrassed. They said, we'll put you up in our beautiful chalet up the top floor. And it's where I lived for 7 weeks in 1968 and almost died twice from leaking gas fumes. So there. And then it got restored, burned and got restored. That's a favorite because that's the cupola of Old City Hall. They took it down in about 75, I would guess, for restoration. And I thought, well, that won't come down for a number of years. That's my son standing there. We're on our way home from the beach at the end of, at the pier house, really. We were pretending to be guests at the pier house. And so I said, stand over there, I'm going to take your picture. And that's history. I don't know if anybody else got a picture of that cupola down on the ground, but it's now up top again and functioning. Wow. So there. Oh, get that out there.
Is that you?
Yeah, that's me. Where did you get that?
What year is that? What year is it?
79. That's 1979, and it's in Montserrat when Jimmy Buffett was recording the Volcano album, and somebody grabbed my camera and took my picture. And that's the day we were leaving the island after the album was recorded. Yeah, that's funny. All right, stop this.
So going back a little bit, you arrived in Key West to be in the Navy, or you were in the Navy, and then you got a job selling tacos. How did that happen?
Well, I was actually assigned to a ship in Newport, Rhode Island. So I was only in Key West in 68 for 8 weeks, and I had to go back to the ship. And I had still a couple of years to go in my hitch. And I didn't know it, but I was going to get early outs. Congress, in their wisdom, and to cut costs during the Vietnam War was excusing us from active duty just when I'd learned enough to not be dangerous on the ship. And they said, you either sign up for 2 years or you go on 2 paychecks. So I said, well, this wasn't going to be my career, so I'm gone. And I was suddenly on the streets in late 1969 with no money. I'd had a good time in Newport, Rhode Island that summer. And I hooked up with a buddy that had been a roommate in college, and he'd gone to Vietnam, had just gotten out and saved his money and bought a little sports car. And we just sort of, played road trip and wound up going to Key West in December of '69. And both of us looked at each other and said, I'm coming back. And he said, I think I'm going to come back too. So I came back for 10 years, married, had a kid, all that stuff, and left in '80. He stayed until about 6 or 8 years ago. And he loved it. And I can't find him right now. I don't know where he's gone. He might be in French Polynesia or something. I don't know. Philosophy major. So he could be on a mountaintop in Nepal, But anyway, that was my story. I got a job as a taco salesman. I wanted to write a novel, and I was sitting in Captain Tony's waiting for inspiration on a bar stool because I thought that's how it happened. And this hippie drove by, a white guy named Afro with long, stringy blonde hair. And he had a huge Mexican sombrero on and this 3-wheel bicycle selling tacos. And I went running out there. He said, what do you want? And I said, I want your job. Oh, get away from me, man. It's my gig. Okay, sorry. And I went back to my beer. Like 2 days later, I'm sitting on the same bar stool waiting for the muse to approach me. And this horrible noise, this clattering at the door, and Afro had ridden the taco bike into Captain Tony's, parked it next to my bar stool, and walked away without a word. And he's still in Key West from time to time. He has a home in Jamaica, and his name's Terry Clark, his real name, and he's an artist, and did very well in life, and is quite happy, and hangs out at Blue Heaven when he's in town. But he barely remembers that whole episode. But of course, it was large in my life because as a taco salesman, that's when I met Jim Harrison for the first time. I met Tennessee Williams. He used to spring for tacos for friends of his, and the Bull and Whistle at that point was called John Brown's Bar. And it was a favorite of Tennessee's, and he'd have an entourage with him, and he'd buy tacos for everybody. And anyway, it was a great opportunity to get to know Key West, and so that's that story. What?
You see my Tennessee picture?
Yeah, that's good. I'll give you a better one today soon.
I know. I saw that picture that you took of him on the gazebo. How did that come about?
That was a referral. Women's Wear Daily had just started their W magazine supplement, and they were doing something on Key West, and they were sending someone down to interview Tennessee, and they were looking for a photographer, and I got the job. And and the woman who did the interview sadly was not a very good interviewer, and unlike yourself, as you let me blab away without interrupting. But Tennessee was being quite the gentleman and was letting her ask dumb questions, and then he'd kind of lead her to a follow-up question that might be interesting, and she would completely miss that and ask her a dumb question. It was really sad, and he finally said to her, let's let the boy take some pictures, and you and I can really concentrate on this interview later. And as we walked away towards his little writing shed in the back, he said, you got 45 minutes, make the best of it. It was wonderful. He couldn't have been nicer. And I took great pictures. How could I not take great pictures? It was a sunny day in Key West, and it was Tennessee. So anyway, that's how that happened.
So after the taco vending, you got a job as a bartender at the chart room.
The chart room. And I was the ultimate fly on the wall. If I could just write novels about what I saw happen in the chart room bar, but I couldn't do it then, or they would have set me up and sent me to jail, or something like that. There were enough people hanging out there that didn't want their stories exactly told. But it was a hangout for the treasure divers, and it was a hangout for people who worked in restaurants and bars. It was a hangout for the heavies in town, the people who ran the town, the sheriff and the state attorney and city commissioners and all that stuff. And so it was all kinds of people from all walks of life, and everybody just got along. It was a great, great scene. And that's when I realized what a unique place Key West was. And I was always in love with it. I always felt like I was walking through a movie. And so I kind of memorized every day, and paid attention to history and paid attention to stuff. And then now I get to write about it. So I'll take it.
You comped Jimmy Buffett, his first beer.
I did. He came in, Jerry Jeff Walker, whom I'd met before, and Jerry Jeff's girlfriend, who was a friend of my wife's. And so it was a reunion of sorts with me and Jerry Jeff and Murphy. And they were with this guy named Jimmy Buffett. We didn't get the last name. And I said, and Jerry Jeff said, "Oh, I'll take a whatever." And he ordered his drink. And I said, "Jimmy, what would you like?" And he got this kind of look on his face like, am I going to have to pay for this or not? Like, is Jerry Jeff going to cover my ass? So I said, "And the first one's free, Jimmy." And he said, "I'll take a Heineken then." So, but it started a wonderful friendship, and it was great.
So the song, you don't have any experience writing songs, right? You were just playing and he heard you, or how did that come about?
No, I used to try to write poetry, and I was thinking I was going to be a novelist and so on. And I paid a lot of attention to song lyrics when I was growing up, rock and roll song lyrics and stuff like Chuck Berry's song lyrics, which are wizardry and his vocabulary, and Paul Simon and James Taylor in those days. But I was always a fan of that kind of music that featured the singer-songwriter. But Jimmy came up to me in the chart room one evening and said, "What are you doing for dinner?" And I said, "Well," that told me that he didn't have enough money to go out to a restaurant. He said, "Well, Judy's cooking spaghetti if you want to come over." And so he joined us. Well, he picked up my guitar at our little house on Walton Street and said, "I'm working on this song." And it was Cuban Crime of Passion. And I said, those are great. What are the chords? And so I memorized what he was doing, but I couldn't memorize the words. Well, about 3 nights later, in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. And I woke up at 3 a.m, and rather than bother the people who were sleeping, the kid and the wife, I went out to the living room and picked up the guitar and started strumming that song of Jimmy's. Well, I wanted to sing it. I just wanted to, it was great. It was a catchy tune. And so I started writing my own verses. And for some reason, I wrote them down. At 3:15 in the morning, I had the presence of mind to get a pencil and paper and write them down. And the next day, when I finally woke up, I looked at it. I said, "What is this?" I called him up and I read him the lyrics. And he said, "Congratulations, you just got half a song." And all right, I'm off and running. So that was the first one. And Finn's kind of happened the same way, where I was sitting in my living room thinking, Margarito is going to make that guy a millionaire. I know it. I can write that stuff. I can write like that. And I wrote 4 lines, and the phone rang, and I got distracted. I never wrote any more than the 4 lines. And then a week later, I was packing a bag to fly down to meet him in Antigua to help him sail his boat for Antigua Race Week. And I saw that little 4-liner, and I threw it in my duffel bag. And when we were down there, I gave it to him. He said, "Oh, okay, let me put that in my journal." And that those 4 lines, she lives down by the ocean and she worries about the sharks, and they hang out in the local bars and they feed right after dark, suddenly showed up in a song. Wow. So that started that. That was fun. Those are great days. And
so among your other jobs, you've also been a AAA travel counselor.
I was. Well, that was part of my that in an odd way has really helped my novel writing, because what I did, I worked in Cleveland, Ohio. I think the summer after my senior year in high school and the summer after my freshman year in college, in this basement drawing triptychs. When you got the magic marker and those flip over maps, and listen to this awful music. It was just horrible instrumental versions of great rock and roll songs. It was just dreadful, but at least I took home a paycheck. And then, so my sophomore year in college, I said, I'm not spending another summer like that. But what could I do? I don't want to go dig ditches somewhere like that. I know every road in America. I could be a travel counselor in Chicago or New Orleans or Boston. So I hand wrote these application letters all over the country, and I got hired in Los Angeles. And I said, well, that's just great. How in the world am I going to get to Los Angeles? And I hitchhiked.
Oh, wow.
I hitchhiked to California. And it was, I kind of put some psychology. I'd read On the Road by Kerouac. I wasn't going to live that kind of life. And so I thought, I'm going to be out there begging for rides from people I don't know. And I wanted to look like I wasn't going to hold them up with a gun and hit them over the head with a mallet in the middle of the night. So I wore a sort of a collegiate looking button down shirt, not a dress shirt, but, and some, in those days, white Levi's, they called them, or tan colored Levi's were popular. And I looked like a clean cut ex-murderer, well, no, but I got great rides. And these people, it was just middle of America, salt of the earth. And, you going to school, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I am, and I didn't want to say, yes, I'm a sophomore at a great college in Ohio. I said, yeah, I'm trying, I'm doing this, taking some courses and that kind of stuff. But I learned more about human beings on my hitchhiking trips, and I did it again the next year. So back and forth across the country a couple times from Ohio to California, back in the days when you could hitchhike that way. And it was a blessing because it's helped me be a bartender. It's helped me in everything I've ever done ever since. Is put yourself in the other guy's shoes, especially when he's doing you a huge favor.
Yeah. How did you get into being a disc jockey?
I started at WKWF in Key West, and that it was owned by the Spotswood family, and who are still there, of course. And they also owned Cablevision, which was the only way you could get television in the 70s through their company. So they didn't really have to make a lot of money at WKWF, and they had family friends working there, and they'd carry in their favorite records and play them. And they had one great disc jockey in the morning. His name was Old Duke. His name was Duke Yannicone, and he was a conch, and he'd been a cop, and he was retired from the police force, not entirely by choice, but he was in the gray area, and but he became a morning, and he had a country and western show that was great. And so everything else was not so hot. Well, Jack Spotswood and I had become friends in the chart room, and he graduated from law school, and I saw him, and he was so proud of himself. He was smoking a cigar the size of a baby's arm, and he was just Mr. Big Deal. I said, Jack, if you're going to hang your shingle in this town, you need to do something about your radio station. He said, what's wrong? And I said, well, it's format free. He said, okay, it's yours. And I went, what? So I became a DJ, and then the program director, and then all kinds of stuff. It went from there. So we played album rock.
You see my cat here?
No, I don't see it. Yeah, right. That's cool.
His name is Macbeth.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
No, that's actually Huckleberry. I'm just messing with the tech guy.
That's even more. Yeah.
So I got to ask you about Hunter S. Thompson.
Okay.
How did you come to know him, and how did you come to work on a screenplay with him?
That's two different things. The first time I met him, he was coming to Key West with his wife on vacation, and Buffett called me up and he said, Hunter's going to borrow my apartment, and I'm giving him your name. I'm not going to be in town, which is just as well. Jimmy didn't want to see what was going on in his apartment when Hunter lived there. So I went down and knocked on the door to offer my assistance, and I heard the screaming and yelling and that stuff. And he opens the door, he flings it open. He says, you've come at a bad time. So, okay. So I came back the next day. We just got along. Hunter, for all of his reputation of being a wild man and the drugs and alcohol, didn't enjoy being around drunks and druggies. And there were an awful lot of people who wanted to be around Hunter who wanted to show him they could keep up with him, which was foolish. And I had no desire to do that anyway. So we got along, and the second time he came to town, he had a contract to write a screenplay, but didn't know how to do it. And I'd gotten some lessons from Tom McGuane on how to structure a screenplay and so on. I'd actually written a couple just as an exercise more. I didn't even try to, I don't think I tried to sell them, but I tried to tell stories and plot them out. And so when Hunter suddenly said, I got to write a screenplay, I said, well, no, first you have to write a treatment, because that's what you've got to really sell to, and it was for Paramount. And so, I don't never heard of a treatment. And I said, well, here's how you do it. So we worked together and actually worked. And the hours were a little weird. And, but there was some Heineken's consumed, but it wasn't knockdown, drag out stuff. And we worked well together, and we worked on several other projects, a couple magazine things, a second screenplay, and a book called The Curse of Lono, which came out in the 80s. I helped him with some editing on that in about 83. So we had a great working relationship, and I learned a lot. Working with Hunter, who was a genius of a journalist. Alcohol took its toll on it. It wasn't the drugs, it was the booze. He had insight that was just incredible. And it was like getting a master's degree in journalism, working next to Hunter. And there was none of this crazy abuse and all that kind of stuff. And he liked to tell stories about it, but it wasn't everything that you'd sort of imagine it might have been.
And he watched your kid. You had him babysit.
Once.
Well, that says a lot about him.
That time, Hunter he rented a Buick LeSabre convertible, about a 72. It was about as wide as the house I lived in at that time, and he never put the top down. It stank. And he went out to a yachting store and he bought one of those bullhorns, electric bullhorn. Drive around town, and he said, "Get that bicycle out of my way," that kind of stuff. Then people would panic and drive onto the sidewalk and onto posts and all that stuff. But he'd pull into my front yard. Now, I wasn't much of a yard parker, but he'd pull into the front yard and park and yell into my kids, "Sebastian, turn on the TV. I'm coming in to watch the news." Well, at that point, all my neighbors knew that some idiot was coming in to watch the news. And, so, yeah, there was an occasion where I don't know what Judy and I were doing, but we asked Hunter if he'd keep an eye on Sebastian, and they got along fine. And Hunter had a young son too, named Juan, who was about 3 or 4 years older than Sebastian. So he wasn't a stranger to parenting. But anyway, Sebastian said that what he did with him during that time was drive around town to people he owed money to and would send Sebastian in to give the lame excuse of why they weren't getting paid that day. And so that was the end of the babysitting chores, but all right.
Before we start taking questions from the audience, I did want to ask you, because I have to ask, what are you reading now, or what is something you've read recently that you really loved?
Well, I have several authors that I read regularly, and I'm not reading a book right now. As a matter of fact, I've got so many irons in the fire with things going on with the new book out and trying to promote it and all that stuff. I'm trying to write the beginning of this novel, and I'm also trying to write a short story or convert 3 chapters of a novel I won't finish into a short story. It's not an Alex Rutledge novel. And so, but when I read, my go-to author is John Sanford. And, I've got Key West to write about, and Key West is a character in my books. And it's a great fallback when I've got nothing else to talk about. I can talk about Key West. It's not a fallback because there's plenty to say about Key West, and I never run out of things to say about it. But he writes the opposite. He writes about the Twin Cities in Minnesota, where it snows all but 3 weeks of the year. And, but I just love his dialogue. I love his interplay with his characters and so on. And so I always try to keep up on John Sanford. Of course, I go back and reread Jim Harrison. I love his books. And when I'm trying to write a thing that involves scenery, I kind of go and I don't plagiarize words or paragraphs. I kind of steal moods sometimes from other authors. You know what I mean? I say, oh, what did he accomplish with that paragraph? I'd like to do the same thing, but put it in my words. And I'll read James Lee Burke. He's just always been there. A great, great author who writes about the Cajun country mostly. And those are the books I enjoy the most in Louisiana. And some other authors that have locations as part of their deal. Like Donna Leon in Venice and Italy, and Louise Erdrich, who wrote about Indian country. And well, Louise Penny, who writes about Quebec, the little town in southern Quebec, and just signed a contract apparently to write a mystery with Hillary Clinton. I don't know where that came. I guess they're pals somehow. And Nevada Barr, who wrote books about the national parks. So I like books that are set in different places, and especially when the authors are good at delivering the places to me and putting me there.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to hope that Marsha Williams, who's our former president of the Key West Library, Friends, she's going to come on and give us some questions.
All right. We'll try. I'll find my way through it.
Okay. First of all, Tom, thank you so much. Many of us really enjoyed the pictures that you've been showing of Old Key West. It's always nice to see what it looks like beforehand. So, so one of the questions that somebody asked was, is Dredger's Lane based on Nassau Lane in Key West? There seem to have been some hints of that in your books.
Well, the answer is actually yes, but I didn't want to use Nassau Lane for Alex to live on, because I thought if I ever hit the bestseller list, some drunk in Captain Tony's is going to want to go up to Nassau Lane and pound on Alex's door and say, come out and have a beer. Right. So I did all the residents of Nassau Lane the favor of making up a fictitious lane. If Nassau Line continued northward across Fleming and ran up past the Eden House Hotel, that would be Dredger's Lane. And so I made it up and I named it before I knew that there's a Dredger's Road in Key West. Little known fact, it's the extension of Kennedy that goes out towards Sigsbee. And I didn't learn that till I was 15 years into my series and writing about Dredger's Lane. So Dredger's Lane is a copycat, is a mirror image of Nassau Lane in essentially the same location.
Okay, good. And
right.
somebody wanted to know if Alex Rutledge was a character when you wrote the story for the Lorien Hemingway short story contest way back in the 80s. Was he a character in that story?
Golly, boy, that's going back. Fortunately, I found and reread that story not long ago. No, but Sam Wheeler, who is in my Alex books, was in that short story. And I maybe a little bit of Alex, but I don't know that I gave him a name. I don't remember. It was a first person thing. I was thinking in those terms, let me put it that way. But I hadn't made up the name Alex Rutledge yet. That's for sure.
Okay. And then somebody asked about Duffy Lee Hall. What's he up to now? And now that film is no longer in fashion.
I haven't figured that out. I had him do some digital. He was suddenly in one book after film went out of common use. I had him become an expert in Photoshop, and Alex went to him for help. But now Alex is pretty good in Photoshop, so I'm not sure what Duffy Lee's up to. He may be a typesetter. No, they're out of business too. I don't know where Duffy Lee is. I was thinking that the other day. He had a little dark room alongside the old pharmacy that used to be Dennis Pharmacy back in the day. Fictitious, but yeah, no answer to that one. Sorry.
And with all the wonderful writers you've met in Key West, did you ever have a chance to meet Shel Silverstein? I
did. I met him. He was sort of standoffish a lot. You know, he was always afraid of getting. I don't know what it was, but he. I went up to him one time and I got him to sign a book for my son. I met him a couple of times with Buffett. He and Jimmy Buffett were friends, and so that's it. I know we didn't become big buds or anything like that.
So no stories about him.
No stories about him.
And have you ever considered writing a memoir? You have such an interesting background.
There's not enough paper in the world. No, I've thought about it. someone came to me once 30 years ago, and she wanted to write a memoir. She was a woman who was involved in motorsports, and she'd done drag racing and car shows and road racing, sports cars and so on. And she said, I want to write a book called A Woman in a Man's World. And I said, but nobody knows who you are. I said, make yourself famous first. Write A Woman's Guide to Driving in Winter Weather or something like that. Well, wouldn't you know, it took her about 6 or 8 years, but now the Today Show is on and they want an expert on driving in winter weather. She gets the call. So she did wind up writing a book about motorsports and driving for anybody, not just women, but has become an expert in all things automotive. And her name's Lauren Fix, F-I-X.
And the impetus was from you.
I don't know if anybody's interested. That's what I'm getting at, reading my memoir, but we'll see about it. We'll see.
Okay. And will you be going to the Meeting of the Minds group in November this year?
That's a big one for me right now, because still I'm nervous about the pandemic and so on. And I have done it for 21 years. So it's the Parrot Head convention that happens the week after Fantasy Fest, usually in the first week of November every year. And I have had to work for 21 straight years during a whole lot of fun. And I'm tempted to go as a paying guest and get my badge and walk around and enjoy all the things and not have to stand by the booth and sell books. And I'm perfectly happy for the bookstores downtown to make the money that week. And I can do signings for them, for Books and Books and Key West Island Books. But I'm tempted not to do it. But let's just leave it at that. I haven't made that decision yet.
Okay. And so many people have said that Key West is not the way it was in the 70s or 80s or 90s, whatever it is, it's not the way it was when they were here at the beginning. How do you feel about that?
I feel that there's an awful lot that I still see that I recognize from the 70s, but everything changes. If you ask somebody that same question about Panama City, Florida, or Myrtle Beach, North Carolina, they just shudder with dread. And we didn't have that happen to us. The height of the moratorium on building height had a lot to do with it. It's sure, money has come, remodeling of old homes, it's expensive, but it's not jam full of condos, wall to wall, 8-10 story high condos. In the mid 70s, America suddenly had the money to travel with. It was only 30 years after World War II ended and 40 years after the Depression. And they wanted to go to the beach. And that was good for Jimmy Buffett because he was singing songs about that. But all the beach towns, Destin and you name them, Gulf Shores, Alabama, Myrtle Beach, and Virginia Beach, suddenly the world drove to those beaches and just packed them. Well, thank goodness Key West was a little harder to get to. I think we got off light. I think change was going to happen. We may not agree with an awful lot of what goes on and what happens, but there's no stopping it. And so I think that in the general sense, we came away fairly unscathed. How's that?
Good to hear. So we have one more question, or maybe it's a comment.
All right.
Your friend Bill wants you to answer your phone to make sure that your extended warranty on your 68 Shelby is still in effect.
My friend Bill wants to know if he text during.
So anyway, somebody who's trying to.
No, he wants to find out if I'm wearing pants, and I'm.
Oh,
so,
okay.
So here, there's Levi's. See, and
there you go.
Yeah, right.
There you go.
He's a journalism. He's the head of the journalism department at Boston University, and he's still a childish sense of humor. Good for you, Bill. Good to hear from you.
Okay, I think we'll turn this back over to Michael now, and we thank you so much, Tom, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you, Michael. Thank all of you on the.
Absolutely. If you don't mind answering one more question, I know that you're publishing a lot of these little Key West histories. How did you get involved in doing that?
In which histories is that?
Um, when the-
The railroad that died at sea and Papa Hemingway in Key West. It started with my friend John Boysenalt, my late friend, sadly, who owned Key West Island Books back in about 97 or 98, called me up and he said, "Do you know how to design a book?" And I said, "Yes, I do." At that point, I was designing calendars. And so a book was actually easier. He said, "Well, it turns out I own the rights to a book written by Dorothy Raymer, who was a columnist for years for the Key West Citizen. And after she retired, she wrote a long essays for Solaris Hill, the periodical newspaper, and then collected them in a book just before she passed away. But it was published by the bookstore. And when John bought the bookstore, he came into the rights to the book. And so he said, "Well, I'll split it 50-50 with you. I've got the rights and you've got the know-how." So we created Key West Collection by Dorothy Raymer, and it's still in print. And not long after that, two fellows who were Hemingway experts met during Hemingway days, and they had done a lot of research on Ernest and done a lot of interviews, and they discovered they had 13 or 14 distinct interviews of people like his sons and people close to him that would make a good book. Well, bingo, they couldn't get Scribner's to go for it, which is the Hemingway go-to. We said, "We'll print it." So Remembering Ernest Hemingway is a book we did in 99, I think. And that was a collection, and one thing led to another. And then Joan Langley, who owned the Yesterday's Key West and Yesterday's Florida Keys and the railroad that died at sea and Papa Hemingway in Key West, she had all the rights to that after Wright Langley passed away. And she offered to sell that group, and I came into those that way. So they just sort of migrated my way. I've stopped accepting new books. If anybody wants to send me something, please don't. Please don't. I'm full of, it's a lot of heavy lifting, I guarantee you. But that's how I got into it.
Okay. And so all of those books and your signed books are available at Books and Books at the studios of Key West and Key West Island Books.
As far as I know, yes. And yeah, they are. That's true.
Okay.
That's true. Yeah, both stores have my books, and my novels are signed. I don't sign the books I didn't write.
Right.
but unless forced. So that's it. Yeah.
Okay. So
All right.
will you stay on as I close this out, just because I don't want to be alone?
Sure, I'm right here with you. I'm right here. You
So
go.
Next talk is going to be March 15th with Rita Troxel. She has written or edited a book called Home at the End of the World. There it is. Oh, look at you. See?
I got my copy.
You on.
Wonderful.
And she'll be in conversation with John Martini, the artist. So please register for that if you haven't. And of course, I want to thank Tom for spending time with. I wish we were doing it in person. I miss seeing you, but
Yep.
thank you for your time tonight. And
You're much easier to pick on in person, Mike. I appreciate everything you've done. It's been a great, easy interview. Thank you.
Thank you. And if anybody is interested in what the Friends of the Library do for us, which I hope you are, please visit the Friends of the Key West Library.org. You can donate or just become a member, which would be great. Thank you so much, Tom. I had a really nice time, and I hope you did too.
Thanks.
All
Adios,
right.
everybody. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.